All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I have to admit, I'm pretty amped about this session. You would have said the same thing. My name is Diana. I manage Klaviyo University, our internal learning and development program at Klaviyo. This session is What is AMP for Email? And it is great to have you with us today. Before we start, a quick note about how questions are going to operate here. At the end of the session, if time allows, I will run around with this microphone and get any questions you have so we can get them answered. If you want to jump to the front of the line with your question, ask it through the app, because we will start with those questions first. So in your app, just click on interactive sessions, ask your questions. We may not get to all of them, but that is where we will start with questions at the end. And now I would love to tell you a little bit about your speakers, Sean and Nikita. Sean is a senior product manager at Klaviyo. For the past 2 years, he has been focused on making Klaviyo's content design tools both powerful and exceptionally easy to use. Last year, he and his team built Klaviyo's sign-up form builder. This year, he's been focused on reimagining the email template editing experience and exploring the new opportunity of AMP for email. Fun fact, the last time he was on stage here at the Boston Convention Center was in 2011, where he sang with an a cappella group for an electricians union meetup. Welcome back. Nikita is a software engineer at Klaviyo, where he is currently leading our development efforts on AMP for email. As the resident expert on the email template editor, he's also seen his fair share of tricky HTML and CSS issues. He is very proud that he recently taught his puppy Samson to ring a bell when he wants to go outside. Today, Sean and Nikita are going to dig into AMP for email. Please help me welcome them.
So who's heard the hype about AMP for email? Anyone? Yeah, all right, I see some hands. Maybe you've read some flashy blogs about what's coming with interactive email. Maybe you've even seen one in the wild in your inbox, seen something that's a little clickable and interactive. Well, today we're here to separate fact from fiction and talk about what actually AMP for email is. And so our goal is that by the time you leave this session, you'll all be experts in what AMP for email is and know more than probably most other marketers out there. So as Diana mentioned, my name is Sean Walsh. I'm a senior product manager.
And I'm Nikita Shankman. I'm a software engineer.
Yeah, and we work on the content development team at Klaviyo. So as Diana mentioned, we own the email template editor, the sign-up form builder, really the tools in Klaviyo that let your design dreams run wild and design whatever you can envision. And so today we're going to talk about interactive emails and how you can create an email that looks something like this, where it's interactive all from within the email client. The way we're going to do that is first we're going to start with what AMP actually is, dive into the history of email a little bit and how we got to where we are. Then we're going to talk about some examples to really bring it to life. We're also going to show you some little code snippets so you get a sense for how easy it is to do some of these things that are actually pretty rich experiences. Then we're going to talk about some barriers to use. Since AMP is so early stage, there are some barriers that make it not as easy to use as other things in the email world. And then we're going to wrap up with what we've been working on and leave a lot of time at the end for questions, since I'm sure there's a lot of questions in the room already in your heads. So before I can talk about what AMP for email is, we need to take a journey back in time. We need to go back before Klaviyo, before e-commerce, even before the internet, back to the ARPANET. That's right, in 1969, there was only the ARPANET. These are room-level computers at universities, all connected to each other. And on October 29th of that year, the first email was sent from that giant computer on the left to that other giant computer on the right. And this is really the first experience of messages being sent from computer to computer. And 2 years later, the first networked email client was built. Now, over the next 5 years, email became actually 75% of the traffic on the ARPANET. So they were onto something. It was then in 1976 that the first marketing email was sent. And so this is the first marketing email. It was from Digital Equipment Corporation selling the DEC System 2020. I don't know if all of you still have your 2020s at home. I know mine's in the closet. But this was sent to 800 people who were definitely not subscribers. And so while it's the first example of email marketing, it's also widely considered the first example of spam email. But the guy who sent this email was interviewed, and he credits this email with actually making him about $13 million. So pretty good for spam. So as the ARPANET turned into the internet, and we had email clients that were not just command line interfaces, the real explosion in email came in the 90s with the advent of companies like Hotmail, where they had web-based email clients, so now anyone with an internet connection could have an email address. And since then, as you all in this room probably know, email has become a pretty big thing. And now over 300 billion emails are sent every day to over 4 billion addresses all over the world. But although the web has really grown from the 70s, before the web even existed, through today to be a rich and interactive experience, email has always stayed pretty static. It's really always been a set of text, images, and links inside of content you can scroll, while the web can be so rich and interactive. And the reason the web can be interactive and email can't is that the web supports JavaScript. But JavaScript is a security risk in email. So the reason we can't have JavaScript in email is that your email contains a lot of your personal information. So it's a place where if someone could run some malicious code, there's a lot of things that they could access. Also, you can't really control who sends you an email in the same way you can control which websites you go to. So anyone in the world can send you something and potentially do something to your personal information there. But now that we have AMP for email, there's an answer to this problem of not having interactivity in email with JavaScript that Nikita's going to introduce.
Cool. Thanks, Sean. So AMP for email makes emails dynamic while keeping recipients safe. It gives you a web-like experience in an email client. It also is actually a subset of AMP on websites. So as you can see on the example on the right, you're able to click into a food item to view it in more detail. From there, you can do things like save it to your board and then return back to the original list. And you can do all of this in the context of your email client. But most importantly, you're able to do all of this while keeping recipients safe. So before continuing, let's talk about what AMP actually is. So you might have come across AMP when like browsing on the web. You might have seen this like lightning bolt on web pages. That signifies that it's an AMP website. So AMP has been around since 2016, and websites can be in AMP to provide a better and more consistent experience across all of your devices. So AMP stands for Accelerated Mobile Pages. The goal is to provide a better experience for mobile users as well as users in a location with limited internet access. This is extremely important as we continue to browse on mobile more and more often. So amazingly, AMP actually provides a 75% decrease in time to load. This means that web pages actually load faster and you can get to meaningful content more quickly. So originally it was designed for mobile and areas with slower internet speeds. What's important to note also is that it's a 90% reduction in data downloaded. So less downloaded data means more storage space for your phone, which is great. We all like that. And it also means that you can download content more quickly since there's actually less of it to download. So let's get into what AMP for email actually is. Well, AMP for email is just a subset of AMP that works in certain email clients. It was first announced in 2018 and then was publicly announced in March of 2019. So AMP for email is really just a new MIME type that will be supported on certain email clients. So let's get into what MIME types actually are and how they work. So whether you know it or not, we actually use MIME types today when sending emails. You can either create an HTML MIME type by editing it in the template editor or using the custom HTML builder. From that, we can auto-generate the plain text MIME type by looking at all of the text that's in the email. Then we package it all up and we send it to all of the recipients. Now, it's important to know that all of the recipients receive all of the MIME types, but depending on which email client you're viewing, you might see different versions. So most email clients will actually render the HTML MIME type, but in highly secure environments like the Pentagon, for example, you might actually only see the plain text MIME type. So let's get into how AMP ties into all of this. Well, AMP is just a new MIME type. You can attach an AMP email alongside your HTML and plain text MIME types. You send AMP to all of the recipients, but only recipients that are viewing on specific email clients will be able to render the AMP MIME type. Other recipients will view the HTML and plain text MIME types, so it's very important that you invest time in those as well. Now I'm going to hand it back to Sean to go through some AMP email examples.
Great. So we want to bring this to life because that was all some diagrams and talking esoterically. But we're going to show you some examples of what you can do with AMP emails and some illustrative code snippets of how easy it is to actually do. So first up, we have carousels of images. So I have seen my fair share of incredibly long emails with just so much content in the newsletter. And a lot of times, I don't even scroll through the whole email because there's just so much there. And so wouldn't it be great if you could collapse it into one section that people could scroll through if they're interested? That's what the carousels in AMP for email support. So you can show a set of images and have people click through or scroll through them to see all the content.
Cool. So how this actually works is you have an AMP carousel wrapper, which contains all of the data about the carousel in general. Then you go and enumerate on all the different things that you want to go and display in the carousel. So in this case, we want to show 2 images, but really this can be anything. It could be images with text or links, etc. And what's nice about this is that AMP actually handles a lot of the difficult behavior for you. So for example, AMP automatically adds those arrow keys that you see on the left and right of the carousel. It also handles swiping and layout on mobile, so you don't have to worry about that. It can also have things like looping and auto-scrolling.
Cool. All right, for our next example, we have showing and hiding content. So a lot of what feels interactive on the web is really just showing and hiding things. You know, you click a button and something else happens over here. You X out of a modal and you see the page behind it. That's really just showing and hiding things that are already there. And so AMP allows you to support this in an email. So in this example we built, we have buttons for asking why people are excited about Klaviyo Boston this year. And based on which buttons you click, you'll see different content appear.
Cool. So the way that this one actually works is that the recipient taps on the button, which sets the global state for topic to level up. Now, anything listening to that state will actually go and update. In this case, we want to go and show a new piece of content when that topic is set to level up. More generally, you can have things now update state globally and then have different parts of the email react to those state changes, thus making the email feel more dynamic.
Cool. So to tie those two concepts together, we've been working with Huckberry, which is a men's gear brand, and also Tenuity, which is an agency, to build out an AMP email to actually send to customers. And so this is the example of the email that was sent out. You'll notice it has an expand collapse section of read more, but also some carousels where they've collapsed content into one section. And so with the initial send that we've done of this email, we've seen some promising results. But if you'd like to learn more, I'd recommend going to this owned marketing session tomorrow at 11 a.m., which is being given by Ryan from the Tenuity team. So for our next example, we have submitting a form. Right now, forms in email are a little dicey. You can put a form in an email, and you can send it out to people, but not all email clients will support actually submitting it. So you could be sending a form to some people that they might hit submit on, and you won't get the data. With AMP for email now, we can support having a form in an email that you know will render anywhere AMP for email is supported. So in this example, we have feedback on a recent order where you say how the fit was, anything we can improve. But you can imagine other use cases like collecting NPS scores and then getting additional feedback, all from within the email. Or maybe having a mini survey where you ask a few questions, and then you could provide some personalized recommendations at the end to really tailor their experience.
Cool. So the way that this one works is very similar to coding up a form on your website. You have a form element which wraps all of your inputs and buttons that you want to display. In that form element, you specify the API URL that you want to go and submit your data to. So in this case, we have an input that is how is the fit. We have another input that asks if there's anything that we can improve, as well as a submit button to go and record the data. We also have to specify the submit success as well as the submit error. So what's cool about this is that AMP automatically shows the success state or the error state depending on the response of the form. If the form was successful, it'll go and show thank you for your feedback, whereas if the form submission was a failure, it'll say submit failed, please try again.
So for our last example we have here is something pretty exciting that AMP supports. It's live updating content in an email. And so on the web, we just come to assume that when I visit a website, if I refresh the page, I could see new content, right? And so now AMP allows you to bring this feature into an email. So in our example, we have a flash sale where you can have the products that are initially available in the flash sale. And then later on, if someone opens up that email can query and figure out which items are sold out and display it as such. Some other examples might be hiding a coupon after a promotion has ended. Say you have a Labor Day promotion and you don't want people 30 days later to go dig up that coupon and then have a bad experience on site. You can hide that coupon and say, hey, it's over, stick around for new promotions. You could also imagine using this to provide a shipping status in your email. Once the order has shipped, the person could go back to just that email and always get a live feed of when the item is coming. Or you could personalize each recipient's experience to the time of day that they open the email or the weather that they're currently experiencing.
Cool. So the way that this one works is that you have an API URL, just like our other example, that goes and fetches all of the products. Then you immediately wrap all of the content that you want to show in an AMP mustache. Now, an AMP mustache is just a fancy way to use variables from state and external resources in your email. In this case, we're pulling it from external resources. The variables in this case are sold out, name, image, product URL, and price. So then we want to go and show the sold out cover only if the product is sold out based on the response from the API. From there, we go and we style our product however we like. So in this case, we're showing an image, the name, the price, as well as the product URL.
Cool. All right, so pretty exciting stuff. This is all pretty new for email, but since it's so new, there are some current barriers to use. And so we want to make sure you all understand that, because I don't think everyone should run out of here and start coding up AMP emails tomorrow. So the first thing to know is that AMP for email is currently only available on Gmail webmail. What that means is that if you send out an email with an AMP MIME-type, only people who open it on Gmail webmail are going to see that experience. Right now, Gmail webmail accounts for only about 8% of the email client market share. That's a pretty small slice of the pie for all this work. But there is more support planned in the pipeline. So Gmail Mobile, which accounts for another 22% of the pie, is currently in a closed beta. We haven't been able to get our hands on it yet, but there's an AMP conference every March where they tend to announce big things, so keep an eye out for it. Also, Outlook.com, which is different from the desktop app, does also have AMP support in a developer preview. That's another 2% of the market. And then Yahoo Mail in March announced that they were working on AMP support, but no radio signal from them since then, so we'll see. But that would be another 6%. So with all that told, that would be about 38% of the email client market share. That still leaves 62% of the recipients that won't interact with the AMP version, primarily because they're using Outlook Desktop or Apple Mail. And so while we don't know if those clients will in the future support AMP, it just means that right now, really the HTML version is what a majority of people are going to see. And so if you're going to invest in AMP, there's a lot you can do with it, but you really need to think carefully about the HTML experience because that's still the majority case. That brings me to my next point, which is that the HTML and AMP pieces must be coded up separately. Unfortunately, it's not possible to take your email as you've designed it and say, hey, I'd like to put a carousel in the middle of this and just sort of slot in that AMP carousel code that Nikita was talking about earlier. Unfortunately, there's some other pieces to AMP emails that require them to sort of be rethought a little bit, and you have to add some more things in. So to go through that, first off, AMP requires different headers. So to support the interactive experiences in AMP emails, it does require you to add JavaScript into the headers and sort of load the modules such as the AMP carousel. Additionally, AMP has some different components from HTML that you need to know about, such as AMP image is different from HTML images. And so you need to make sure that you sort of convert your HTML over and make sure it works. Lastly, in CSS, there are some additional rules in the AMP validator, such as important tags aren't currently supported. So this is all to say that it is a bit of extra work to do the AMP email. And so when it comes to thinking about your AMP email experience in your HTML, you want to make sure that the experiences are similar. So while you might have a carousel in your AMP email, you want to think about having a grid of images of that same content in the HTML one. Because the same person might open up the AMP version on their webmail client and then later the HTML version on their phone, you wouldn't want them to have a very different experience between those two emails.
Cool. So for the third point, if you've ever actually worked with AMP for websites, you might need to know that AMP for email is a subset of those components. AMP for email doesn't currently support certain components for security and complexity reasons. So for example, AMP for email does not support multimedia like AMP video and AMP audio because the email client can't actually play those files. Now, it also doesn't support complex behaviors like social widgets, for example, AMP Instagram and AMP Twitter, because that would be way too complicated to include inside your email client. Also, it's important to know that AMP script, which lets you run arbitrary JavaScript, is not supported for pretty obvious reasons. It would be a complete security violation. And then AMP Analytics is also not supported because the analytics vendors that are supported on AMP Analytics are for websites and not for AMP for email. Now, there's a lot more components defined here, not defined here. So if you're interested in the fully supported list of AMP for email components, please visit the AMP documentation in the slides. So, and the last one is that domains must be approved by Google for bulk sending. Now, there's a few steps that you actually have to go through in order to be approved. Firstly, you need to have a dedicated sending domain and then get that dedicated sending domain approved. Once you've done that, you can go and code up an actual production-like AMP email. From there, you go and submit a form with both of those pieces of information to Google. Now, it's important to know that each submission can only have one sending domain. This means that, for example, if you get approved with marketing@klaviyo.com, you cannot use sales@klaviyo.com to send your AMP emails. And then lastly, you actually have to wait for a response from Google to either approve or reject the form submission. Now we'll get into how Klaviyo is going to actually support AMP in the future.
Great. So now that you're all AMP experts, you're probably wondering what we're doing about it. And you probably have an idea. So we are working on adding AMP, the ability to send an AMP MIME-type via campaigns and flows in Klaviyo. What this means is you'll be able to code up an AMP version or an AMP MIME-type, paste it into Klaviyo in a custom code editing environment, and save that along with your HTML and plain text MIME types. And then when it's sent, we'll package that all together and send it to everyone. And so then once it goes out, we're also going to measure who opened the email and saw the AMP one and also clicked on inside of the AMP email. You notice that these things are a little bit, I don't want to say bare bones, but initial MVP. And that's because we want to see how people start using AMP before we build it more into our drag and drop environments, make more robust analytics tools. But all these things are in our minds, and we're excited to see what people build out and how they use the feature. So right now, this feature is in a closed beta because we need to do some load testing and make sure we can send AMP at the scale that we want to support. But if you'd like to be one of the first to send AMP emails from Klaviyo, please sign up for early access. What you can do is email me at sean.walsh@klaviyo.com. We also have a few sign-up sheets at the front here after the session, or you can just leave your business card, and we'll reach out to you once we're ready to include you in the beta program, and we can talk about how to get your sending domain approved. So, to run through a few takeaways from the session, AMP for Email is an exciting new way to have interactive email content. We saw examples of showing and hiding things, having carousels, even live updating content, but there are some caveats you need to keep in mind, such as only Gmail webmail supporting it, and it being, having to go through this approval process. But we expect these barriers to go down over time as adoption improves and it's more well-known in the marketplace. Lastly, please sign up to be notified when you're sign up to be notified, and we'll let you know when we're ready to have more people in the beta program. So with that, I'm sure you have tons of questions, and so we'd love to take them now, but thank you so much for listening to the presentation and coming here today.
So we're going to start with some questions that were asked through the app.
Okay.
Our first one is, what happens to AMP email if internet connection disappears, such as on an airplane?
So that behavior will probably be similar to one on a website. So the things that have already been loaded will continue to be there, but it won't be able to load any new content into the email client.
Yeah, I haven't personally tested it. I'm not sure if Gmail would show an HTML MIME-type instead, although I guess you're in the webmail client, so you also have to have internet there. Yeah.
Another question, can you location target with AMP?
So you possibly could, depending on what is actually making the request. So if you're hitting an API, you might be able to figure out the location based off the IP that it's hitting from, although it might be difficult depending on where the email client is hitting from.
I'd say also with Klaviyo, because you have location information stored on the profile, so when we send the email, we in theory know where that profile lives based on either geo-IP targeting or in the past a shipping address. And so you can, in theory, encode the content of the email to know that this person lives, say, in Denver, and then you can target it based on that. So it's almost like in the email that's sent and not live pulled necessarily at time of render of the email. But there's a few ways you could get around that.
So this next question relates to Shopify. Are there plans to integrate Shopify product pages as blocks in the AMP builder?
I'd say we don't have plans right now, really concrete plans for a drag and drop experience. I'd say AMP inside of the email client is just an iframe, and so it really displays an AMP web page with some restrictions. And so when it comes to a Shopify product page, I'm not too familiar with if one, there's an AMP version, and really there needs to be an AMP email compliant version inside of it. But I assume that'd be something that we'd want to make usable in Klaviyo. So even if it's not necessarily Shopify provides that AMP code, we could maybe make some sort of experience that makes it easy to pick a product, and you can have that experience inside there. I assume to look at different variants, sort of click add to cart, things like that, and make those requests out from the email.
So we're going to take a few more from this list that you provided, and then we'll go to the audience. So kind of talking about implementation, how are you guys looking to implement AMP on Klaviyo so it's easy peasy like everything else you guys do?
Yeah. I mean, the dream is really to have AMP as part of the drag and drop editing experience. We would love to make it as easy as you drag in a carousel block and there's sort of a fallback HTML block that is just, say, a grid of images or something, so we make that easy peasy. But right now we want to see how this goes. There's a chance that this releases in just Gmail and sort of stops there, and there's not a lot of adoption for one reason or another. And so we're learning about this as you all are learning about this, so we're going to keep a close eye on how this goes. And as it gets more adoption, we'll want to make it easier and easier to enable all of our customers to use it, not just those that can custom code.
And then for this one, I'm going to combine a few questions, and then we'll go to everyone's questions live. Topic, sort of email load time, images. Before AMP, any plans to optimize product catalog images so a product image doesn't serve full scale? And potentially related, how does this kind of relate to email load time?
Sure, so I'll answer the first piece, which is a little bit separate from AMP, but is load time of images and emails, especially from the catalog. Right now in Klaviyo, we don't store sort of minified versions of your catalog images and serve those up. Say when you're on mobile, we don't need to send a crazy huge image file. We can send a tinier one. And that's an enhancement that we should make regardless of AMP to make it so that emails load really quickly on mobile when sent from Klaviyo. As it relates to AMP, what AMP, it stands for Accelerated Mobile Pages. And so Google is handling a lot of this image caching sort of behind the scenes, which is why when you use the AMP image component in an AMP page, it's doing some special things, and Nikita might tell me I'm totally wrong. It's doing some special things to cache those images and make it really fast. So I would expect the AMP email to be faster thanks to the work that they have been doing, but not sure about the other pieces. Any comments?
So you are loading more stuff, right? There's JavaScript running inside of your email client, but that JavaScript is highly optimized and cached by Google, so it loads pretty fast.
Yeah.
Great, and I know there are people here with more questions. I'm going to invite you to ask them live, and I'll bring the microphone right to you. Who has got a question? Yeah.
So for some of the other software tools that we use, like Yotpo, where we can have them submit a review directly within the email, are there any types of possibilities for the stuff that you're talking about outside of AMP that might be coming soon?
Yeah, sure. So Yotpo has done a great job of coding up an email with a form that will reliably work in a lot of places. We've actually taken a look at how they do it. It's pretty cool. And so when it comes to things like adding a form block in just the HTML editor, that is something we could add. It's not on the roadmap right now, but as we get more feedback and requests for it, that's something we can think about prioritizing. I'd say what's nice about AMP is that you can create some of these interactive experiences with emails today. Like I don't know if anyone's looked at Rebel Mail or some of these other tools that let you create some pretty dynamic experiences in emails. But if you look at the code, it's pretty wild. The way they're doing it is through sort of hidden checkboxes and labels and things just all over it. And so it makes it really hard for you to both code it up and use it in a repeatable way. And so the nice part about AMP is that we can code it up like humans and say, this is a carousel and here are the images, and it handles all of that complexity inside of it. And so as with any feature, we sort of evaluate adding that sort of advanced functionality to the HTML email experience, I think sort of separately from AMP. But AMP is a nice way to get a lot of that stuff in without having to hack it in a way.
We'll come up to the front.
As AMP gets more adopted, does that imply our analytics going to be more complex? I mean, we have open clicks, revenue obviously, but interactions, engagements, shares.
Yeah, so we would be able to probably capture clicks that happen within the email and ones that don't necessarily take you to another website. That would be like another metric that we would be able to capture. I don't know if we're going to be planning on supporting it anytime soon, but that is something that is possible.
Yeah.
Great. Actually, let's get, I want to make sure I don't neglect the back.
I guess I wanted to ask a question that would come before like the analytics, but do you already have any data that's showing that this is effective for email? Because we find that whenever we put a GIF in an email, there's actually lower engagement and lower click-through. It's almost like, why did you send me this junk?
Yeah.
And yeah, just wondering if you guys had any like data on that, or whether it's just gut and we're waiting for it to be adopted and therefore it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, sure. So I am pretty skeptical about interactivity in email just for the sake of interactivity. The reason we're sending emails is, it's to build a relationship, but ultimately the reason we care about click-through rates so much is that people click through the email to your website, where they have the full rich experience. It's almost like they're in your store, right? And so when it comes to adding interactivity or dynamic elements to email, I think of it as only being valuable where it actually enriches the experience in a way that makes customers' lives easier or provides them content they wouldn't have otherwise. So examples like the live updating shipping inside the email, I think of that as something as it sort of augments the experience, while other things like just a carousel of images for the sake of having that instead of a GIF, I personally wouldn't expect that to really improve the conversion rates within the email. And so we've only really done one live send right now with that Huckberry email. I don't want to give away too many details because I'm not sure what Ryan's going to share tomorrow. We did see some improved engagement on that, but the numbers are pretty small because we didn't send it to too many people, and of that, only a small set opened on Gmail webmail. But we are planning to send more. And with this AMP beta that we're hoping to release to you all as soon as possible, we'd love to see more people testing it out and learn. Because as AB said earlier, we're not going to provide products that don't help you grow your revenue. Like, it doesn't make sense for us to invest in something just because it's flashy. We're going to do it if it actually helps you all grow your business.
Great, and we have time for another question. I saw a hand
Jeremy, up
back
front.
here. Oh, perfect. Thank you.
I think this is awesome. I'm excited about it. I asked one of the questions about image optimization, and if it's going to be the same, yes, with Google optimizing things, great and all that, but the product catalog, let's say we're synced to Shopify, so the product catalog in Klaviyo is pulling from this rich, full-scale image, whatever the maximum size. So if we're not, we're hijacking. I'm hijacking your, the plans here. So ultimately, we want to get the product catalog optimized with or without AMP. And
Right.
That's a different topic entirely. But if AMP is going to become important, it's probably worth putting on the radar that image optimization, on the way into the product catalog, because nobody's sending, 2,000 pixel, image in email. We're sending 300 pixels or 600 pixels maximum. So perhaps that should be part of the subset of the project. I don't want to give you guys a longer to-do list, but if the goal here is optimizing emails and making it so faster load times so people just don't click out, perhaps the product catalog image optimization can become a subset of this. I think customers won't wait, or they won't have to wait.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the goal, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think it is we're talking about AMP, but it is a feature that we feel valuable to everyone outside of AMP for HTML emails as well. So I think we could look into that. And with this, there are some load advantages of sending AMP emails, but we also want to speed up the HTML version as much as possible. So yeah, it makes sense.
And then within, and then within the same subset of the forms, so besides Yapo or other things that are collecting, stamped, whatever these services are, anytime we want to do a survey, that's the kind of stuff that I hope will be coming. That's you said you have the check boxes for different things. So this is going to be stuff that'll be pretty much default.
Yeah, I'd say we're evaluating what we want to add to the HTML version. I think because we wouldn't want to provide an experience that lets people send an email that some people who receive it can't interact with, or it looks strange in some way. So we have to make sure we do it right. So we're balancing, the value and sort of volume of asks to how hard and reliable it will be to actually code up.
And off the record, you can turn the video off. Do you think Apple Mail will ever support it?
I had no idea. We'll see.
Okay, thanks.
All right, and if anyone didn't get their question answered, will you guys be around for a little bit after the program?
Cool.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you, Sean and Nikita.
Thanks, everyone.